you for that. Okay, everybody say hi to Mom.
Hi, Mom.
Hi, Mom.
Hi, Mom.
All right. We're starting a new section, like I said, and I got a little introduction to this. You remember that this section, we're going to look at two judgments. There are actually two groupings of judgments. And it's funny how Jeff does what he does, and I don't know how he does it. He's Jeff. But he's reading Hebrews 9 this morning, and he talks about the two appearances of Jesus. The first one was to do what? Take care of our sins. And how did he do that? He went to the cross. And what happens on the cross? He takes on our sin and receives God's wrath. He receives God's judgment. But it's through that judgment, in fact, that he offers what he offers in the second coming. He offers salvation. And that theme is one I've picked up in Isaiah. And it was a different way for me to look at judgment in general. A lot of times when we read these Old Testament things, it's, woe is you, and, fire, brimstone, and that, that's not the happy-feely Jesus that we have come to know and love. But we only have that happy-feely Jesus because he took on the judgment that we deserve. And to me, it reinforces the fact that I was going to kind of skip over these judgments and not spend a lot of time on them. But as I was reading them, what I found was that same message that Jeff had today, was that, yes, these judgments are severe and they're harsh, and we hear them, and it doesn't sound like what we are used to as Christians. But it's critical to understand that, because even in the midst of all the judgment that we're going to read about, God offers up hope. I will restore. I will preserve a remnant. I will save. And I think we need to have that sort of mindset as we're reading this. The other piece of that is, I think it ought to help us to focus in a little bit on our own lives. Where are we unjust? Where are we not sensitive? Where are we walking away from God? Where do we think we have control of our lives and not letting God have control of our lives? All these themes that we've talked about through the prophets. I don't know. To me, it just kind of, again, I don't know how Jeff does that, but Jeff's Jeff, and so anyway, that's sort of my opening thought there. Now, if you remember, we did this outline of the first 39 books, and by the magic of computer technology, it transforms into a nice little pattern. And we spent time on a section called The Tale of the Two Kings, the yellow ones. We learned about Ahaz, who had no faith, and we learned about Hezekiah, who was full of faith. And now we're going to move into the second level. And these are two groupings of judgments. One is the oracles of judgments in chapters 13 to 23, and those are primarily against the nations. It's the external nations, but it's also the northern kingdom, which is interesting because this is to Judah. And then the second grouping, are the woes against Israel. These are really woes against the southern kingdom. And they're for different purposes. And if you remember in the story, Ahaz had, and when we read about Ahaz in chapter 9, he had no faith. He's trying to do everything under his own. God says, I know you have no faith. I'm going to meet you where you are, a man with no faith, with a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety. Test me so that you can have assurance. Test me so that you can have some faith. And Ahaz says, no. I have it under control. I have it under my own power. And God says, okay, well, I'm going to give you a sign anyway. And we read in chapter 7, the virgin will conceive the child, and in a very short period of time, this immediate fear will be gone. And we read later in chapter 8 that the fear that he has for Assyria, that'll be dealt with. And then in 9, we have this glorious presentation of the Messiah for the first time in really stark terms. I think it looks something like this. No, it didn't. I take that back. I thought I had a slide for that. You know, wonderful counselor, Almighty God. What are the other two? I'm trying to find it. Prince of Peace and everlasting. Yeah. So he presents this. So I'm not only going to take care of your immediate, I'm going to take care of your near term, and I'm going to take care of your future. Have a little faith in me. And what we're going to start in this is the continuation of that line of thought. These judgments to the nations are also to help assure Ahaz that his external enemies will all be dealt with. They'll all be dealt with. I'm in control. I control history. I control time. I allow this to go for a while for my purpose, but I will deal with this. And so that's what we're going to read in this first section. And then we won't get to the second section today, I don't believe. I really had just hoped to kind of skim over this, but there's just too much in here. Okay, so this is what we read at the end of Hezekiah's story. So this is sort of the last thing we read in the hierarchy. It was in the chiasm, it was the Hezekiah's thing. And this will be a sign for you. Hezekiah was also given a sign so that he could trust God. And in a very short time, has this agricultural image here, in a very short time, a couple of harvests, that'll be dealt with. And once more, a remnant of the kingdom of Judah will take root below and bear fruit above. What does that tell you about God? Faithful? Loving? Merciful.
And he's never going to completely destroy.
And never completely destroy.
He had to preserve the line for Jesus to come. You know,
Yeah.
I mean,
Right.
if it was completely
Right.
annihilated, there would be no way.
Right. Paul tells us all of sin falls short of the glory of God. Well, that was true for us. It's true for them. And it was true even in the past. So if God did execute justice fully, ain't none of us going to be here. To catch your phrase there, Rich. He ain't none of us. Right? But he preserves a remnant. And think about where this happens in the Bible. So Adam and Eve sin, they encounter judgment. They're preserved. Right? Because God's can't plug more. If Adam and Eve were judged, that's it. The whole world was due judgment, and God executed that judgment, but he preserved Noah. Right? He preserved something so that his plan could be fulfilled. He's in control. No one on earth was faithful, and yet God chose Abraham to build a nation, to be a remnant, to be a light to the nations. And then Sodom and Gomorrah, they deserve judgment. And yet out of that, remember the discussion that God has with Abraham? Would you spare them for 50? Would you spare them for 40? You know, I'm stepping on thin ice here, but will you spare them for 10? And yeah, Lot and his family are preserved there. And then think about the evil that happened in Jacob's family with the brothers. And yet Joseph is preserved. And why is he preserved? To bring deliverance in the famine. And then there they are in Egypt. And God's judgment is there. The angel of death is on the march. And yet he preserves them and protects them so that his plan could continue. I have this note here. For people that had from the time of Abraham been called God's own people, and in a culture where your value is measured by your descendants, the idea of preserving even a small part of your people would be seen as a hope and a blessing and it's mercy. And this is, remember Hezekiah when he prayed? Pray that God will leave a remnant. Pray that God will preserve his plan, that he'll preserve a people for him. Pray for that. And once more, a remnant will be left. Once more, God's going to execute judgment, but he's going to leave a remnant. He's going to leave a way for his plan to be carried out. Okay, well, that's my introduction, except for the next slide, which is called introduction. Okay, well, we left off reading about Ahaz in chapter 9. So why don't you go ahead and open up there, because that's where we're going to start. I knew I had a slide for this. And remember, we had this glorious introduction to the Messiah, and he'll be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. And good quiz answers for you people that spoke out, because that means you're paying attention. Or
break into song.
yeah, or no, handles Messiah. Yeah, one of the two, either one would work. It is interesting. This is just a side note. If you ever looked at the song sheet for Handel's Messiah, I'm sure some of you are in the choir can sing and do that, or at a program, how many of those come from Isaiah, as he's talking about, and it's because the Messiah, it's talking about Jesus and what's preserved, and some great lines out of Isaiah are in there. But what we didn't mention at the time, and we may have glanced over it, was how this happens. And it's because the zeal of the Lord will accomplish this. God's passionate about this. He's passionate about us. He wants relationship with us. And he's passionate about his plan to bring that about. And he will do that, even though he's righteous and even though sin is everywhere. And he has to execute judgment, even though he's still passionate about it. And so this kind of restoration, salvation through that judgment happens because God's passionate about it. His zeal will bring that about.
Well, that's kind of like what the Bible's about, right? Showing God his nature.
Right.
And that's what he's showing us through all this.
Right. And when we read the Old Testament, sometimes it's, oh, mean, oh God. No, not mean, oh God. It's merciful God. Because he could have and should have probably, done us all in, because we're all guilty and fall short.
A lot of children think their father's mean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They are his children.
Yeah.
It's not right though, but it is.
Yeah. Now since we're back in chapter 9, let's bring this back in context. It's with Isaiah, and God's told him what he will accomplish. Have a little faith, Ahaz. Have a little faith. God will accomplish this. He'll make sure of it. He's passionate about it. We can trust his word. And that's the assurance that we can have as well. All right, and we're going to jump in. Do you mind starting, Cindy? Where? I can go to this screen. So this is chapter 9, starting with verse 8.
The Lord has sent a message against Jacob. It will fall on Israel. All the people will know it. Ephraim and the inhabitants of Samaria, who say with pride and arrogance of heart, the bricks have fallen down, but we will rebuild with dressed stones. And the fig trees have all been felled, but we will replace them with cedars.
There's a couple of key words for good Christian. They say with pride and arrogance of heart. What's it say? Humble yourself before the Lord? No. What this says, no, God, we're not even going to pay attention to you when you judge. Okay, you're going to knock down our walls, we're going to rebuild them. Who are you? We're in control. You're going to cut trees down? No problem. We'll replace them. Right? It's that pride of when God's executing judgment for discipline, just like you talked about, I'm not going to listen to that. I'm going to stiffen my neck even more. I'll rebuild it. I'm in control. I'm in charge. The Lord has sent a message against Jacob, and it will fall. The message will fall on the northern kingdom. So it's kind of predicting what's going to happen on the northern kingdom. And Ephraim, another name for the northern kingdom, and the inhabitants of Samaria, they're the ones with the pride. It's going to fall on them. And notice the parallel. I wrote it down because I knew I'd forget. Somebody else had it. Parallel
structure.
Parallel structure. What's it called? Synonym. Parallel synonymism. That ain't right. Synonymous parallelism. That's what it is.
Okay.
Backwards.
That makes sense.
Yeah. The same statement, but in two different ways. Right? With they say with pride, with arrogance of heart. Two different ways to say that. I'm just trying to reinforce the poetry lesson.
And I don't know if you remember, but several years back, these verses were based the book of the Harbinger.
Oh no.
Yeah,
Yes.
after
Khan.
9/11, yeah.
Oh,
So they have a tree when we will rebuild that tree. Yeah.
Very
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I guess the pride's still still here.
Yeah.
Still comes before the fall, I think you said last week, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, next little verse here.
But the Lord has strengthened reason's foes against them, and has spurred their enemies on. Arameans from the east and Philistines from the west have devoured Israel with open mouth. Yet for all this, his anger is not turned away, his hand is still upraised.
Now Rezin, if you recall, was the king of Syria, not Assyria, but Syria, Damascus, or current day Syria, north of the northern kingdom. And they had plotted together to come and attack the southern kingdom. If they take the wealth in the southern kingdom, they'll be stronger. They'll be able to resist Assyria, the bigger threat. So the Lord has strengthens his foes. So he's coming down. And this phrase will repeat often in chapter 9. For all this, his anger is not turned away, even though this judgment is being rendered. No, we're not done yet. There's still judgment to come. There's still judgment to come. Next one.
But the people have not returned to him who struck them, nor have they sought the Lord Almighty. So the Lord will cut off from Israel both head and tail, both palm, branch, and reed in a single day. The elders and the dignitaries are the head. The prophets who teach lies are the tail. Those who guide this people mislead them, and those who are guided are led astray.
What's the purpose of discipline? What's the purpose of judgment? The father? Why is the father mean? Right? To bring the children back. But they've not come back. They've not returned to him. This should have had them fall on their knees calling, we're sorry. Forgive us, give us another chance. But no, that's not what they do. No, you go ahead and judge. We're going to rebuild it though. You're not going to knock us down. We're in control. We're in charge. And so, all right, the next step, the next level. All right, I'm going to cut off your head and tail. And who's the head? Well, that's the elders and the dignitaries. That's the leadership, political leadership. And I'm going to cut off the tail. That's those who should be speaking truth. So I'm going to cut off your leadership. And what happens to the country without good leadership?
Fail away.
It's gonna go away. And this is the antithetical parallelism at the bottom. Guide this people will mislead them, and because they don't have good leadership, they're led astray. Okay, next one. This is the one I hesitate to do. I'm going to skip over it, I think. So everybody just close your eyes for a second. Okay. Oh, well, that's close enough. Okay, here we go.
Yet for all this, his anger has not turned away. His hand is still upraised. Manasseh will feed on Ephraim, and Ephraim on Manasseh. Together they will turn against Judah. Yet for all this, his anger is not turned away. His hand is still upraised.
Not enough. They haven't turned. All right, my hand's still up. My hand of discipline is still up. Are you going to turn? No. So Manasseh is one of the territories of the Northern Kingdom. And so it's going to be internal squabble. They've lost their leadership. Now there's this internal squabble. And they're going to say, okay, we're going to turn that turmoil that we have and we're going to turn it south. Still not repenting. Still not coming back to God, and yet his hand is still upraised. Next one.
Woe to those who make unjust laws, to those who issue oppressive decrees, to deprive the poor of their rights and withhold justice from the oppressed of my people, making widows their prey and robbing the fatherless.
So this is what God's looking at. He's looking at the nation, the leadership, the way they're being led, the way the nation runs. And what does he not like? Well, Amos talks about this, if you read Amos, a lot. Some of the other minor prophets did as well. but it's unjust laws and it's oppressive decrees and it's depriving the poor, it's withholding justice. God is, he wants us to have a just society. He wants us to look for those that are oppressed, that are underprivileged, that are taken advantage of by those of power. That's what God sees. And he sees that and says, whoa, this is what you're doing. My hand is still upraised.
What will you do on the day of reckoning when disaster comes from afar? To whom will you run for help? Where will you leave your riches? Nothing will remain but to cringe among the captives or fail among the slain. Yet for all this, his anger is not turned away. His hand is still upraised.
What will you do on this day of reckoning? There is injustice and you're responsible for it. There is idolatry and you're following other gods, not me. You're so stuck in your pride, you think you can out control me? What will you do? My hand is still upraised. Are you going to turn? Or are you going to burn, as my Baptist friends would say? I mean, and that's really the question being asked here. What are you going to do? What will you do?
Woe to the Assyrian, the rod of my anger, in whose hands is the club of my wrath. I send him against a godless nation, and dispatch him against a people who anger me, to seize, loot, and snatch plunder, and to trample them down like mud in the streets. But this is not what he intends. This is not what he has in mind. His purpose is to destroy and to put an end to many nations.
You notice the shift? We were talking about the northern kingdom. Remember, this is in the whole thing with Ahaz, right? I'm going to have this deliverance, and he went through a couple different ways, and now it's, I'm going to deliver you from the northern kingdom. They're going to fall apart. My hand is still upraised. Judgment is still due them. Now he shifted. Now he shifted to the Assyrians. Woe to the Assyrians, the rod of my anger. This is what I'm going to use to discipline the northern kingdom. But there's a woe to them. Why? Because they're not following God? They're not the children of Israel. No, it's because their purpose was to plunder. That's to seize, loot, and snatch plunder. Remember Isaiah's son, quick to the spoil, quick to the plunder? That's what he, as a witness to Assyria, this is what you're supposed to do. But what does Assyria do? It goes way beyond that. That's not what he intends, it says. That's not what he has in mind. No, his purpose, not my purpose. My purpose is to discipline. His purpose is to destroy. And then let's read this one. Where are we at?
We're not 12 or 13. 12, 13. When the Lord has finished all his work against Mount Zion and Jerusalem, he will say, I will punish the king of Assyria for the willful pride of his heart and a hasty look in his eyes. For he says, by the strength of my hand I have done this, and by my wisdom, because I have understanding, I removed the boundaries of the nations. I plundered their treasures. Like a mighty one, I subdued their kings.
There's so much in this little verse. Remember what we read last week, where he's talking about the king of Assyria, and this was to Hezekiah, so this is 25 years later, but it's the same message. You know, you've said, I've done this, 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 I've done this. And then God says, no, 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 I've allowed that. And then you are going to be taken back with a ring in your nose and a bridle in your mouth. I am going to lead you back. I am going to show you who's in control. Same kind of image here. But then go to the first part. When the Lord had finished his work, what's his work? His work is to discipline. His work is to judge these Israel and then Judah from Mount Zion and Jerusalem. So there's work in the northern kingdom. There's also work in the southern kingdom. Then I will render judgment on Assyria. And that's the reason. Next one.
Therefore, the Lord Almighty, will send a wasting disease upon his sturdy warriors. Under his proper fire will be kindled like a blazing flame. The light of Israel will become a fire, their Holy One a flame. In a single day it will burn and consume the thorns and its briars.
A nice little messianic hint there. This light of Israel. And that will become a fire. It's going to start off as a little flame. Remember, we talked about the dawning of light last week? But it will become a fire and the Holy One a flame. And in a single day, what day is that? It will burn and consume his thorns and his briars. Remember, we talked about last week about, I think we talked about it last week. I hope it's not this week. Otherwise, I've killed my whole point. But it is this week. Never mind.
Give us a hint.
Oh, keep looking, keep your eyes open.
Yeah, well, it's coming up. It's coming up. The, yeah, it's coming, yeah. Oh, I got to know my material a little bit better. All right, one more here.
In that day, the remnant of Israel, the survivors of Jacob, will no longer rely on him who struck them down, but will truly rely on the Lord, the Holy One of Israel. A remnant will return, a remnant of Jacob will return to the mighty God.
In a single day. So there's a day coming when all this is going to happen. In that day, the remnant of Israel, there's this remnant again. Judgment will come, but not everybody. God will preserve, and he will preserve so that they'll return to the mighty God. God's purpose is always restoration. His purpose is always to bring people into fellowship with him. And so a remnant will return. When does that happen?
The second coming.
So second coming is one of the ways this can be interpreted. There will be a time future to us, but haven't you returned to God? So what happened? When did that happen? So it happened sometime in your life. And you can talk about the first century. Jesus provided this opportunity for us to return to the mighty God. And you might even argue, well, this happened after Babylon, when the remnant returns to Jerusalem and rebuilds the city, rebuilds the temple. So it's one of those prophetic things that it could be all these times, because God's always in this process of bringing people to him. He's always in this process of judging sin. He's always in this process of leaving a remnant so that some will come and return. He's always in that process. And so it could be all of those times and any one of those times.
So your people be like the sand by the sea, Israel. Only a remnant will return. Destruction has been decreed, overwhelming and righteous. The Lord Almighty will carry out the destruction decreed upon the whole land.
Yeah. Judgment will come. And judgment will be severe on the nations. We know that. We know that's coming. The Lord Almighty will carry that out. He's in control. He's going to do this. But he's still a God of mercy. And it's through that judgment that he preserves this remnant and offers salvation. And it's that theme that we talked about when we started this with Jeff. The two comings that are in Hebrews, it's that same idea. Yes, there will be judgment. It'll be severe. And this judgment on Christ was severe. And yet it's through that we're offered salvation. So this theme is just all the way through. And how will that happen?
A shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse. From his roots a branch will bear fruit. The spirit of the Lord will rest on him, and the spirit of wisdom and of understanding, the spirit of counsel and of might, the spirit of the knowledge and fear of the Lord. And he will delight in the fear of the Lord. He will not judge by what he sees with his eyes, or decide by what he hears with his ears.
I started with, some of these threads that are in the tapestry, and one of them being the see, hear, no walk. And every time I see it now, I gotta highlight it, because I just think it's really, really neat how it's just woven through the entire story. But who is this stump of Jesse? Who is this shoot that will come? We talked about. Who is this branch who will bear fruit? Who is that?
David.
I'd say initially it's David.
David.
Well, David's gone.
Or then it would have.
This is well after David's
Would
time.
have to be Jesus.
It's going to be Jesus.
Yeah.
Yeah. David was a son of Jesse. And so it's in that line,
Mhm.
as Jesus is. But there's this branch in the future. There's this remnant that'll be left. There's this hope that you still have in the midst of judgment. There is this salvation that will come, even though the judgment will be severe. My hand is still upraised, but it's not to destroy you completely. It's to bring about a condition where a remnant can return to me, where I can enjoy fellowship with man again. And the branch will do that, and the branch will bear much fruit. This person, Jesus. And then look at how it's described. The Spirit of the Lord comes upon him. Read the baptism story of Jesus? What happens? Spirit comes like a dove, right? Right there it is. And the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, mighty counselor, right? We just read that. There's one other one in that. I think I remember those 4 words. Spirit of counsel and might, and the spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. I do only what my Father says. Why? Because I am the Father in one. I trust what the Father says. I have that knowledge of the Father, and I respect him as the Father. I do only what he says. I'm obedient to the Father. I will delight in that. I will delight in doing God's will, even though it will cost me. How does Hebrews 12:1 go? But for the joy set before him, he endured the cross. Because he delights in being obedient to God. He delights in the fact that he's doing God's will. He delights that he's part of this plan that God has to redeem all men to himself. And he doesn't judge by human eyes, and he doesn't judge by human knowledge. He judges by God's eyes and God's knowledge. He doesn't judge by what he sees as a human. And you see these 4 verbs repeated, throughout. And here it is. Here's the branch that will see with that new eyes, with the way that God wants to see, and hear what God says, speak what God does, walk the way God wants to walk. This is the promise of the future. Ahaz, remember this is still in the context of Ahaz. This is the promise of what's to come. Yes, judgment is coming, and yes, my hand's upraised, and yes, it's going to be severe, but through that judgment, there's going to be salvation. There's going to be life. And it's going to spring from David's line, from the stump of Jesse. It's a beautiful poetic image of what's to come. All right, I've talked too much.
No, not at all.
Go ahead.
I think a lot of people that say they're Christians have lost that, what Jesus did. He will delight in the fear of the Lord.
Right.
We've lost that reverence and all.
Yeah. It's not just following a moral code. No, it's much deeper than that. It's the purpose of why we walk that way. Yeah. And we could almost end there, right? It's a great lesson for today,
Amen.
but I have more.
Not gonna bring us down now, are you?
This one, you'll love this one.
Not enough of the Pharisees and what they did outwardly, but their heart was different, but yet they looked great.
Yeah.
To everybody in the crowd.
Yeah.
But yet, he knew, that's why he said, I'm not gonna judge you by what I'm seeing and what you're saying.
Exactly.
It's strictly on what's inside you, what you're really doing.
Yeah. And Jeff even talked about that this morning. I don't know if you picked up on that, but he talked about you do it through the ceremony and outwardly you're clean, right? And Jesus talked very much about it's not what's on the outside that's going to purify, it's what's on the inside.
Thank
Do
you,
you have that
He's
fear?
seen it,
Yeah. Good point. Okay. I don't know where we are down here.
But with righteousness, he will judge the needy. With justice, he will give decisions for the poor of the earth. He will strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, with the breath of his lips, he will slay the wicked. Righteousness will be his belt, and faithfulness the sash around his waist.
Now that ought to bring up, I've read that before somewhere. And you have read it in Ephesians 6, right?
Ephesians, right, the
Right.
armor of God.
The armor of God, the full armor of God, exactly. And this isn't the only place Isaiah brings up this sort of image of a warrior going to battle. But it is a battle. It's a spiritual battle. And this is what this branch is going to do. He's going to go to battle for us. He's going to battle against the injustice that we do to each other. He's going to, strike. He's going to judge. That's what he's going to do. But it's going to be through that he's going to bring salvation. And righteousness will be how he girds himself, and faithfulness. Yeah.
And that was a big part of David with Goliath too, was righteousness. He had a little stone, but
Right.
he had a big amount of
Yeah.
faith.
Yeah.
And righteousness.
Yeah.
He was right.
He was right.
And that was the biggest part of his armor.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
was on the right side.
Hey,
on
in
the
fact,
right side of
He,
things.
he tried to put on Saul's armor, but it didn't fit.
That was human armor.
Yeah, and it didn't work. Right, exactly. Good point. Yeah. This is one of those when I never noticed this before, but trying to prepare this, I'm reading this and go, I've seen that before. Yeah, I don't know where. I had to look that up, but I knew it was there. Okay. In that day, so we're still in the same day when this restoration will happen.
In that day, the root of Jesse will stand as a banner for the peoples. The nations will rally to him, and his resting place will be glorious. In that day, the Lord will reach out his hand a second time to reclaim the surviving remnant of his people from Assyria, from Lower Egypt, from Upper Egypt, from Cush, from Elam, from Babylon, from Hana, and from the lands of the Mediterranean.
In that day, the root of Jesse, this branch, this shoot, will be a banner for the nations. The nations will stream to him. Isn't that the whole purpose of Israel? To be a light to the nations, to bring all nations unto God. That was their purpose. They didn't do so hot with it, but that was their purpose. And no, they failed. They're judged. But this remnant that will come, this branch, this root, he will be successful. And he will bring all nations to himself. And of course, that's our Christ.
And you spoke about that last week about how you come in and send them out to all places of the world,
Yeah.
get them out of their own territory. But they actually were they thought they was making a weed, but they was putting seeds everywhere.
Yeah.
But they got tired of that and they wanted to send them back too after a while. They had to go finally. But yeah, they got stronger, but they also spread the message.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even in the New Testament times when they're dispersed because of the persecution.
Yeah.
Yes, that's a bad thing, but what was the effect of that?
Oh,
Mhm.
Everywhere, Spain and Rome and, Mid-Asia, all of that. It all happened. Okay. One more about the banner here, I think.
He will raise a banner for the nations and gather the exiles of Israel. He will assemble the scattered people of Judah from the four quarters of the earth. Ephraim's jealousy will vanish, and Judah's enemies will be destroyed. Ephraim will not be jealous of Judah, nor Judah hostile toward Ephraim.
When you read the end of Revelation and you see this beautiful city that's
Come.
described. And what happens? Well, the gates are open because there is no sin, there's no conflict, there's none of that. What did we read last week? Their plows have been beaten into
The
no,
guns have
spears have been beaten to plowshares.
Yes,
Yeah.
not guns.
Yeah,
the weapons.
there's an end. I couldn't get it last week either. Yeah, there's the end of this warfare. There's the end of this conflict.
Mhm.
Jealousy, and all of that greed and all those kinds of things are going to be done away with, and we'll have peace. What a promise for this! What a promise! And remember, Ahaz has no faith, and God's have given him a sign, and then he's going systematically through your northern kingdom and Syria. They're going to be judged. Syria is going to be judged, and finally, all the nations are going to be judged. And what's the end result of that? Well, the end result of that is what we read in John's Revelation, when all nations then come back to God.
There will be a highway for the remnant of his people that is left from Assyria, as there was for Israel when they came up from Egypt.
There will be a highway. There's another one of these words that's repeated through: path, highway, way, road, that Isaiah uses. And it's not a treacherous climb up a cliff that we're having to do. That's not how the nations are going to come back to God. It's not going to be because they're meandering through this labyrinth of rules and specifications. And no, it's a highway. It's straight. It's level. It's smooth. God's going to provide a way for us to come to him. And it's going to be a highway. It's going to be a highway. People can stream to that easily. It's an easy path back to God. And he uses that image also in Isaiah 40, when he's talking about John the Baptist. Make a way in the wilderness. Make a way in the place where there's sin and where there's suffering and where there's not God. And make a way, a highway. Prepare ye the way. Make a way for God to come and be with his people. And it's that same sort of image, and it's repeated throughout Isaiah. Oh boy, got perfect time. Okay, so here's the rest of it. So in chapters 13 to 14, there's judgments against Babylon. And then on down the list. These are all the other nations that are around. These are the nations that either are strong now or have been strong in their history that surround them. And remember, in the context of talking to Ahaz, have a little faith, have a mustard seed of faith. Your immediate threat, your midterm threat, any threats you might see in the future. All of those are going to be judged because they're all guilty. They're all guilty of sin. But through that, there's going to be salvation, not just for you and not just for the northern kingdom, but for all of these nations. There's a path back to God. It's a highway. Through all of that judgment, there's going to be this path back. There's going to be this redemption. All right, we're not going to read those.
It's interesting that all of those are a prophecy against until you get to Jerusalem, and it's a prophecy about Jerusalem.
Oh, I like that. I did not catch that. I have to explore that one even later. Later. I wish you read that last week. It took some time on that.
About being chosen.
It might be. Okay. So we're not going to read all those, but there were a couple of things I just wanted to pull out. And these are just going to be single verses I just thought were kind of cool. We call it a selective sample. So this is in chapter 19, which is against Egypt.
In that day, there will be a highway from Egypt to Assyria. The Assyrians will go to Egypt and the Egyptians to Assyria. The Egyptians and the Assyrians will worship together. In that day, Israel will be the third, along with Egypt and Assyria, a blessing on the earth. The Lord Almighty will bless them, saying, Blessed be Egypt, my people, Assyria, my handiwork, and Israel, my inheritance.
Now, does that strike you as what's that doing in the midst of all these chapters about judgment? It shouldn't. It shouldn't. In Ahaz's time, remember, Hezekiah, the second in command from the Syrian king, said, "Why are you relying on Egypt? They're just going to splinter under any kind of weight. They're not really going to be there for you." Well, Egypt and Assyria are the big powers, and they're at odds. Think of U.S. and Russia. It's that kind of deal, right? They're the superpowers, and they're at odds. And then we read, "Oh, there'll be a highway. Oh, another highway from Egypt to Assyria, a highway of peace, not a highway of conflict." Interesting. And then there's Israel in there. What's Israel have to do with those two? They're enemies of both of those countries. But those countries are enemies of Israel. Have your perspective. The Lord Almighty will bless them, all three of them. And notice there's judgment predicted. But notice what happens. There's going to be salvation. And Egypt will be my people. They will be under the banner. They will be with me. They will return to me. Assyria, my handiwork. Look at the work I've done in this nation. Yes, they were judged, but they're now my handiwork. I've brought them back to me along this highway. And Israel, my inheritance. And I can't help but go back to Revelation 22, when John describes what happens there at the city, and all of these nations stream, and they stream in righteousness. There's salvation here, not just for Israel, but for all nations. I just thought, in the midst of all these judgments, that was kind of cool. Remember when we read Hosea, and Hosea's 3 children from the promiscuous woman that he was told to marry, and they were the last 2 were not my people and not my beloved, or something like that. And then we read Zechariah after the exile, so much later, and he uses those same words. He says, "No, now you are my people. Now you are my beloved. Now you are part of me." And this is the same image for these nations. So God's salvation is not just for Israel, but it's for all nations. I thought that was really, really kind of cool. And then here's another one that I thought was pretty cool.
Look, here comes a man in a chariot with a team of horses, and he gives back the answer. Babylon has fallen, has fallen. All the images of its gods lie shattered on the ground.
Well, those of you that are fans of Revelation have read that phrase before, haven't you? Now let's read it in Revelation 18:2.
With a mighty voice, he shouted, "Fallen, fallen, a Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling for demons and a haunt for every impure spirit, a haunt for every unclean bird, a haunt for every unclean and detestable animal."
Fallen is Babylon the Great. Symbolically, all of this evil is in the world. All of this evil that God can't stand. That's going to be judged. Fallen is Babylon. I will do away with that. And yet what comes after this, 19, is the marriage of the Lamb. After this, you see this full restoration, this full salvation that comes. When I see that kind of connection, I get a little goosebumpy. But yeah, Babylon's fallen. Yeah, as a nation, God took judgment on them. But here in Revelation, I think it's symbolically, it's that way of, evil, and all the way this evil is represented there. All of that's going to be done away with. That will be judged, purged, gone.
What was the verse before this that we read in Isaiah?
A highway away. Jesus says it, I am the way.
Yeah,
I am the
right.
way. And I can't remember, I was trying to find it and I can't remember. Doesn't he say something about my yoke is easy, my burden
Yeah.
is light, my way is.
Yeah. Yeah, we think the Christian life is hard, and in some ways it is, because it's hard for us to get rid of ourselves.
Yeah.
But it is the right way.
Right.
And that makes it easy because we're in relationship with God. Yeah.
And
Okay.
it's the way for everyone, all the nations, not.
Yeah. Okay, so take you back to this and notice there's a parallel here. So with the blue, the parallel of the judgments. We had the parallel of Ahaz and Hezekiah, and we saw there was a threat and a response to threat and a sign from God. That's sort of the parallelism in those two stories. Well, the judgments have a similar parallelism. And we didn't read all of them, so you didn't catch it all. So I'm going to help you out a little bit. The nations have a purpose. We read about one of them. Assyria was to plunder. It was to be the rod of anger for God. So the nations had a purpose. But they went beyond their purpose. You know, I came, but
As we
you,
tend to do.
but you want to destroy. I want you to plunder to be a rod of discipline, but you want to destroy. So they went beyond their purpose, and that sets them up for judgment, their due judgment. And we can read the 13 to 23 and get all of those judgments. Bottom line, God's sovereign. Bottom line, God allows things to happen. God prevents things from happening. He says it, he wills it, he will deliver it. He's sovereign. But even through that judgment, there's hope. There's always hope. There's hope for Israel. There's specifically laid out for the hope for Israel, but also hope for the nations. Where that one phrase where you're my inheritance, you're my handiwork, and you're my
People.
people. The
Egypt.
three. Yeah, Egypt, Assyria, and Israel. Yeah. So that's the structure of these judgments, if you kind of work through them. And because this is in parallel to the woes against Judah, maybe we ought to see some of the same kind of parallelism. Well, let's look at that. I'm going to preview the next section. Israel has a purpose. What's their purpose? To be the light to the nations. They were to live in covenant with God so that, one, they will be blessed, but more importantly, they will be a blessing. That's their purpose. And they didn't do so hot. Right? Just like the nations, they did not do well. They did not remain in covenant. They weren't obedient, and they didn't have faith in God. They went to idols. They went to other ways of doing things where they thought too much of themselves, any way you want to phrase that. They failed in their purpose. And thus, their due judgment. And when we read the woes starting next week, as conveniently time works out, we'll see that what they're due. Why? Well, because God is sovereign. God had a plan from the very beginning that he's going to bring man back to himself. He's going to save man from himself. And along the way, he's had to judge sin. But always there's a remnant. Always there's hope. Always there's this future. And then of course, the Bible ends with a vision of what that future is, where you have this holy city where God resides, and the people are righteous, and there's no evil, no war, no conflict, no pain, no sorrow, no suffering, and the nations stream in and out. God's ideal. God's sovereign. That's what's going to happen. We can bank on that. And then hope is offered. And it's not just for Israel. It's not just for this group. It's for the nations. And we, as just a representative sample, are the Gentiles that are part of that nation that God has called. That the root, the branch, the Messiah has come about because he was willing to take on the judgment so that salvation can be offered. And so what we're going to see in the next section, which is the woes to Jerusalem, it's going to be a lot of reading. So we'll do a lot of reading next week.
Not
But
next week. The week
2
after.
weeks. Thank you. The week after. Yes, you're correct. Yeah, but a series of Isaiah's reflections or God's reflections. And it kind of breaks down this way. So we're going to read a good bit of 28 through 35. And so, and I'll show this again next week, but
In 2 weeks.
I'll show this again the next time we meet. In 2 weeks.
Trying to get us all.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't mean to be confusing.
No,
So-
I wrote it down.
Yeah, so the first poem or the first reflection that we'll have is, it's on the Northern Kingdom, so it's on them. And the second one is going to be to the Southern Kingdom, it's on you. And then there's a reflection on me, on God. And then 3 poems that we'll read, or 3 parts of one poem, depending on how you want to break it up, on us, on our relationship with God. And then finally on the end times, and there's 3 beautiful poems there on the king, on the city, and then on the people that live there,
Hmm.
on the redeemed. And so that's what we'll tackle probably the next time we meet and the time after that. I don't think we'll get through all of that. That is, that's a lot of reading. But if you want to read ahead, spend a little bit of time, 28, 29 especially. I thought this section, and I didn't even want to go into spend a lot of time on this, and we're gonna probably end up spending 3 weeks on it. But there's just,
This isn't really a question, but I just, you know, you and Jeff do such a good job coordinating, but the thing that kept striking me all the while we were doing this was that God saved Joseph, he saved all this, and it's kind of like when Pastor ended his sermon this morning, he said, you know, God saved us. Why? So that we can serve God.
right,
It's not
exactly.
for us.
Oh, yeah.
To look
Oh,
good.
great tie-in, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's,
took it that
yeah,
way. Great job, thanks.
yeah, yeah. All right, well, that's what we're gonna stop there for today. And then we'll hit that, like, that's a ton of reading next week, so.
Next time we meet.
It's a lot of reading the next time we meet. Give me a second here and I'll close this out.